Good morning. My name is Christine Denny. I'm one of the Grand Rounds co-directors, along with Doctors Kate Elkington and Jeff Miller. We have a few announcements before we begin. Next week's Grand Rounds will be presented by Dr. Bianca Jones-Marlin, Herbert and Florence Irving Assistant Professor of Cell Research in Psychology and Neuroscience and in the ZMBBI Institute downtown. The title of her talk is Nature, Nurture, and Neuroscience of Parenthood. Next week's session will be in person with an additional Zoom option. Lunch will be served for in-person attendees in the first floor atrium outside the auditorium at 12:20. Before I introduce today's speakers, I just want to remind everyone on Zoom and encourage them to please post questions at any time during the talk using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom window. This is separate from the chat. And if you are a trainee, please put the word trainee before your question as we will prioritize these questions. Please also write, "Can ask question myself," or prefer to have my question read at the end of your question. If you are willing to ask your question yourself, we will promote you to panelists so that you may ask your question directly to our speaker, camera on or off as you prefer. Today's Grand Rounds will be given by Dr. Stephen A. Kushner, professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Columbia University. He is also a research scientist at the New York State Psychiatric Institute and co-director of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for Precision Psychiatry and Mental Health. I will now turn over the meeting to Dr. Blair Simpson, our interim chair, for our great announcement.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's great to see so many people in person. So I asked to insert myself to introduce our speaker today because it's not just about our speaker and he's not really, it's going to be a different sort of Grand Rounds. This is really an exciting announcement for our department about a major new initiative. So first, let me tell you about Stephen. So Stephen received Stephen's a star. I guess the simple way to say it is Stephen is a star. Stephen went to the University of Pennsylvania and did his MD PhD at UCLA. And then he's one of ours. He came to our residency program. We're very proud of him. And he had this unusual course where right out of residency, he took a faculty position over in the Netherlands. The rumor on the street is he took that faculty position and immediately became chair. That's not quite true. He did go up the ranks, assistant and associate, and then became chair. And then as part of the strategic initiative, if any of you guys remember that was pre-COVID. Jonathan Javits and I ran the strategic mission for research many years ago. And one of the strategic areas we really wanted to recruit in was genomics. Stephen, as part of that strategic initiative, was recruited back to Columbia and joined other people in our department who were doing genomics work and particularly getting increasingly focused and interested in this thing called precision psychiatry. So that obviously includes, Sander Marks doing his incredibly innovative work with the Amish and Anthony Zogby, Brad Miller, Rebecca Muley, Jeremy Veenstra Vanderweel, and others in our department. So Stephen came in to sort of join that group. But what's enormously exciting is that now this whole initiative and this whole work, if you will, is like taken off. So Columbia University has received a $75 million gift from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation to fund a center for precision psychiatry and mental health. And Stephen and Sander Marks and Joseph Gogos are the co-directors of this new center. And this has the opportunity to take what we've been doing to the completely next stage of what we can do. And it's not obviously this is great for Stephen and Sander and Joseph's career, but this is great for our department because I think it has this opportunity to really create this extraordinary opportunity to really be leaders in this field of precision psychiatry and to tap the expertise across our 12 research areas and our affiliation with the Office of Mental Health in New York State to really have major impact. So we wanted to host this grand rounds, and Stephen was going to present the center. And then Joseph couldn't be with us today, unfortunately, for a health reason. So Joseph won't be here. We wanted to introduce you to Joseph too, but Stephen and I will come to the stage and we'll moderate a question and answer and discussions. So with that, Stephen, can I invite you to the stage?
Before I start, I would like to say that, first of all, it's amazing to be back here. I actually officially started a couple of years ago, but it's so wonderful to have things back in person again and to be engaging with people in person. So thank you for all of you who came here to be here today. The other thing I want to say is there's no good reason why I'm the one who's standing up here. Just as well, it could be Sander or Joseph who are presenting this. We're all doing this equally together, and it's just by essentially a coin toss that I'm happen to be standing here giving this presentation. I'd like to, following on Blair's announcement and this gift, we thought that it would be a good idea to introduce to many people who the Stavros Niarchos Foundation is and sort of some of their background so we could have some perspective. So the co-president is Andreas Dracopoulos, who is actually a nephew of Stavros Niarchos, who was a major shipping magnate, and in 1996, basically left the entirety of his wealth, which was quite substantial, to endow this foundation. And since 1996, the foundation has given over 4,700 grants, totaling more than $3 billion to nonprofit agencies. They exclusively work with nonprofits, either institutes or universities. Historically, the vast majority of what they've done has been in the humanities and the arts. So one example, they do have some of their main offices here in New York, and otherwise they're headquartered also in Athens. And one of the major, it was really an amazing project. They gave $55 million toward a total $200 million renovation of the main branch of the New York Public Library. The New York Times actually did a whole piece in the architecture section. It's a phenomenal place to just go visit. There's really awesome videos about it. They've done a lot of work in terms of infrastructure. This branch opened in July 2021. It's on Fifth Avenue at 40th Street for anyone interested to visit. But where we got contacted by the SNF was through their so-called health initiative, which is a relatively new development in the foundation in terms of their focus. At this point in time, they've invested over $750 million toward health. The centerpiece of that is $500 million that they've spent to build 3 new state-of-the-art hospitals, one in Thessaloniki in Greece, the other in Sparta, and the other in Komotini. The architect for all of these hospitals was Renzo Piano, who maybe many of you know also designed the building that ZMBBI is housed in downtown. And then when COVID hit in April 2020, they had an initiative, a global initiative, where they gave over $100 million toward COVID research. And then not long after that, they started to realize that along with the infectious disease component of the COVID pandemic was sort of what many people are starting to call the second or the silent pandemic, which of course is the mental health crisis that has arisen and the awareness of the mental health problems that have been not only a consequence of COVID, but also have really stimulated a public dialogue that arguably has never happened before. And so with that, the foundation really started to get interested in how they could make investments in the area of mental health. And they converged on precision psychiatry and were very interested in the work that was happening here and the conglomeration of a variety of different potential partners in, here in psychiatry and in neuroscience and in neurology and across the university. And so just a few weeks ago, the Columbia University formalized this agreement that Blair just referred to before in order to create this Center for Precision Psychiatry and Mental Health. I'd like to take you through some of the really key people that helped bring this to being. This was primarily negotiated through Lee Bollinger's office, the president of the university. Katrina Armstrong, who's our new dean, was an integral part of this. As it became clear that this was going to happen, and there were extensive discussions about how exactly that the entire program would be laid out, Blair has been just an integral part of that in helping to ensure that psychiatry is very properly represented in this, and ultimately that everything that we do in the center will be predicated upon what's happening in the clinic. Richard Axel and Rui Costa and Tom Aniatis were also really integral, particularly from the scientific component and also with the liaison that I'll speak with in a moment with regard to ZMBBI and the neuroscience program here at Columbia. So as Blair mentioned, Joseph Gogos, Sandra Marks, and myself were appointed co-directors by the Board of Trustees not long after the agreement was formalized. That's, at least for me, a very humbling and enormous responsibility, which I think we all take deeply seriously. I think most of you probably know Sander quite well. He's done some phenomenal work. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those things, but he, of course, was the founding director of precision psychiatry in our department, and an enormous amount of the stimulus for all of this has arisen from the work that he's done. Joseph, I think, maybe is perhaps less well known to many people, but is really in many ways a legend in his own right. And it's really a deep privilege to be entering this and doing this together with him. Joseph's a professor of physiology, of cellular biophysics and neuroscience at Columbia. He's a principal investigator at the Zuckerman Institute. He has an MD and a PhD, and his work is really fundamentally rooted in using animal models to explore psychiatric genetic risk. And I'll talk a bit about some of the major human genetics contributions that he made, which in certain areas of psychiatric genetics are truly singular. So what is this whole thing, precision psychiatry? It's, I feel like in a way that, everyone who uses this term to some extent maybe has different definitions. So let me say, when at least I use the term, what it is exactly that I mean by that. So if we're talking about precision psychiatry, my sort of operating definition is mental health care, which is designed to optimize efficiency or therapeutic benefit for particular groups of patients that are selected, particularly, at least at the present time, by using genetic or molecular types of profiling. And this is, of course, not a novel idea at all. It's been around for quite some time, particularly in the broader areas of medicine, but it's still sort of coming into being in the field of psychiatry. Barack Obama in January 2015 said the following quote when launching the so-called Obama Precision Medicine Initiative, which I thought this quote was really great and captured a lot of it. So I'll just read it. Doctors have always recognized that every patient is unique, and doctors have always tried to tailor their treatments as best as they can to individuals. You can match a blood transfusion to a blood type. That was an important discovery. But what if matching a cancer cure to our genetic code was just as easy and just as standard? What if figuring out the right dose of medicine was as simple as taking our temperature? So I'll give one example. I give all the credit to Sander for this example because he really found this very inspiring, and so I'm going to borrow it. So in early 2010, there was a study that was being done on an experimental kinase inhibitor called PLX 4032 for melanoma. And that was developed in a very targeted way because they understood mechanism. And the mechanism that they understood was that a specific subset of patients had a very particular oncogenic mutation in the gene BRAF, which is valine to a glutamate at the amino acid position 600. So they enrolled exclusively patients who had this particular mutation with the melanoma. Okay, so there is the tailored aspect of this, and it was known based on drug screening experiments that this particular drug was very, very specific for inhibiting the kinase, particularly that's containing this mutation. They also, this was in the early phase studies, exclusively enrolled patients who are terminally ill with metastasized cancer, so sort of worst case scenario. And a subset of these patients really showed a dramatic clinical improvement. So here on the left is, this is before and after pictures of the tumor burden in a particular patient before on the left and on the right after treatment with this drug. And there's now many examples of this. Gleevec is a good example of that. For CML, and there's just an increasing number of these examples in oncology. And one of the things in a variety of areas of medicine, particularly in oncology, the question is starting to be raised, which is, what if rather than this being an exceptional example, that this is actually not uncommon and maybe has the potential to be the rule? Okay, so more generally now, precision psychiatry, and precision medicine in general. So we're talking about the customization of healthcare in which medical decisions or practices or products like therapies are tailored to individual patients. And the pathway to do that, the workflow to do that, is by analyzing the cause of an individual patient's disease, beginning at the molecular level, in order to ultimately identify targeted therapies that address the underlying pathophysiology. And that the question is whether we can do the same in psychiatry as has been done in many other fields of medicine. Thanks, Simon. Am I supposed to click on this and then? Okay, here we go. Okay, so let me say a few things. In the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to get into the details, but maybe we'll be able to do that a bit in the Q&A, or invite any of you to contact any of us to talk about these things in more detail. But at a relatively high level, I'd like to kind of give an overview of sort of the major focus areas that we intend of the center. And this schematic is meant to sort of show the overall view, but let me try to walk through this. So the first area is in etiology. So as I tried to just describe, it's fundamental to the concept of precision medicine or precision psychiatry that you have some handle on either the etiology or the pathophysiology of the disease. That, of course, is, and in particular, if we're talking about molecular mechanisms, that, of course, is one, ongoing challenge for psychiatry, where historically that's only started to come into view. But we do believe that over the last years, there are two, and those, in our view, are genetics and autoimmunity, that are etiologies which are very tractable. We can ask questions about mechanism in a very detailed way in the laboratory and have clear potential for how to intervene or design therapies. And so I'll talk a bit more about what the efforts are in this regard. But step one is we're going to be doing large-scale screening for patients who have either genetic or autoimmune etiologies of psychiatric illness. The sort of levels 2 and 3 are under the rubric of what we call pathophysiology. So first are the nature of the models that we're considering to be working on, and those are either animal models or human stem cell models. So both quite well developed model systems that we think are very complementary. Obviously, neither one of them substitutes for a human being, but for a whole variety of reasons, we think that these two model systems are very amenable to be able to do the pathophysiologic work that we think is necessary to be able to move through this schema. The third is at the level of therapeutic discovery. So I want to make one thing clear, which is all of the work that we intend to do in the center is going to be driven by a desire to be able to move from the clinic in order to develop therapies. We're not going to be doing experiments for curiosity-driven research in order to just understand the fundamentals of how biology is operating. This is very much with a focus on translational work and pathophysiologic mechanisms. And so in that regard, the identification of potential therapeutic targets and approaches to be able to design assays for therapeutic screening are the key drivers of this next, this therapeutic discovery piece. And last, our hope is that with this understanding will come the opportunity to do not only observational clinical studies, but ultimately interventional studies. And I'll give an example of some of them that are already on deck right from the beginning. So let me give an example of two current projects that are going on that maybe give a flavor of the kind of work that I'm trying to refer to, which have to do with work that's going on, in particular in these two cases, by both Joseph and Sander. So the first is a gene called SETD1A. So the story starts with a gene called SETD1A, and the discovery of the association of loss of function mutations in this gene called SETD1A and the risk for schizophrenia was initially made by Joseph and his group. And that's since been replicated in very large-scale studies. There's now a mouse model that Joseph's developed. And one of the major discoveries that Joseph's lab has made is that inhibition of a protein called LSD1, which is a critical regulator of epigenetic mechanisms in a variety of cells, but in particular in neurons, that inhibition of this protein can rescue the effects of animals that are carrying, in particular mice, that are carrying loss of function mutations in SETD1A and exhibit a variety of phenotypes that are consistent with the disease manifestation. And so on the basis of these findings, Blair referred earlier to the work, the work that Sander's been doing over the last several years in a founder population in Pennsylvania, not that far from here, in which Amish and Mennonite populations are living in quite large numbers. And those founder populations are very remarkable in many ways. And one of them is that their allelic distribution, the kinds of mutations that they have, we all, of course, have tons and tons of mutations in our genomes, but the allelic distribution in those populations is very, very skewed. And so certain mutations that are extremely uncommon in the general population can be much more abundant in these so-called founder populations. And so on the basis of the findings in Joseph's lab, Sander went back into this population and discovered that there's actually a number of what otherwise would be very, very rare mutations in SETD1A that are not so uncommon there and appear to be very associated with mental illness. And so on the basis of this, the center's now in a position to be able to launch what arguably really would be, if it would be successful, would really be the first precision psychiatry clinical trial in which, through a mechanistic-driven approach specific to a particular gene mutation, there would be a therapy that was developed on the basis of the knowledge that we had of the pathophysiology, potentially akin to the example that I showed you earlier with the patients with melanoma. The second case deals with the other etiology that I was talking about that we want to focus on, which is autoimmunity. And in particular here, I'm talking about neuronal autoimmunity. And we believe in this particular case, likely even an antibody-mediated neuronal autoimmunity. And so in this case, there was a woman that Sander met. Actually, it's sort of historic, if I can divert for a second and tell the story. When Sander first came to the US in order to begin studying after medical school and begin to pursue a lot of the ideas that he's been pursuing over the last several years, he was able to come initially to New York for on a Fulbright scholarship, and he worked at the Pilgrim Psychiatric Hospital that many of you may be familiar with. That's one of the Office of Mental Health state inpatient facilities. And the very first patient that he met is this patient I'm going to describe. And she's been hospitalized in the New York State system for over 20 years. And here's an example of the degree of her cognitive impairment. Clinically, she carried a diagnosis of schizophrenia with very severe catatonia and was refractory to almost any treatment that anyone had been able to develop across those decades. So cognitively, her MoCA was 4 when Sander met her. Here's an example of a drawing of her clock, on that task. Then over the course of early treatment, and what we're talking about here, right, is treatment, for neuronal autoimmunity, essentially immunosuppressive treatment and more classical approaches to be able to do that. Early in the treatment process, her MoCA goes up now from 4 up to 12. And you can see that the clock drawing is improving. And then here, following treatment, now her MoCA is up to 21. I can tell you at this point now, after being in the state hospital for over 20 years, she was discharged. She's not living independently quite yet, though we don't give up hope that that could possibly be the case. But in an assisted living situation, she's in an entirely different cognitive state and functional state than she was before. And this is, someone who was quite ill for a quite long time. With the permission of the family, I'm going to show you the following videos. This is an example of this patient before she received treatment. Simon, I think I need to go off of the laser pointer in order to start the video. There, perfect.
What are you doing now, April?
N-O-W. Now. N-O-W.
What are you doing now, April?
N-O.
You putting in a stamp?
N-O.
April, what are you doing right now?
Putting it now.
Putting in now? What is now?
N. Putting in N-O-W.
What are you doing right now? You putting in an account?
I'm putting in N-O-W.
What is an N-O-W?
N-O-W.
Now. What are you doing exactly?
Signal.
What is that?
Signal.
Signal?
Yes, signal.
What kind of signal?
It means signal back.
Signal back? To who or what?
I'm not sitting in that chair.
Okay.
I have allowances now.
How are you feeling today?
Now.
April, how are you feeling today?
Now, signal back. Did it do it? It's on the clothes where my part where I put.
April, do you know what day it is?
print.
What date it is today? What is?
I put a print.
What is the year today? What's this year we're in?
I'm not worried on the year. I said I put a print.
And here's the video after a few months of immunosuppressive and immune modulatory treatment.
So I was born in Amsterdam. Where were you born exactly? Baltimore? Do you remember what year it was when you were born?
73.
73? What was it like growing up there?
Not in particular.
Was it a nice childhood, like growing up in Baltimore area?
Well, I moved too far down.
You moved a little bit?
Like
Still in Maryland?
1 mile.
1 mile? And you lived in Maryland for all your life?
Mainly until I hit New York and I moved to Maryland.
And where'd you go to college? University of Maryland? And you studied accounting, right?
Yeah.
How did you like going to school there?
It was good schooling.
Was it a good school?
Yeah.
What was your relationship like with your brother? Is he a good man? Do you like him?
Yeah.
He's a good guy, right?
I don't know. I don't go.
You don't remember that? What was he studying? Did he go to college also?
I think he's been to some school.
Some school? What was accounting, going to a college with accounting major like? What kind of were the classes? Were they good?
Yeah,
Were the teachers were good?
Yeah, but they were tough.
They were tough on you?
They were tough, period. Hard
Well-
subjects.
What were your grades like?
I got A pluses true sometimes.
A pluses, yeah? You're a smart lady.
Yeah.
And I think so. You're good with numbers, right? You always have been. And what was it like in the Maryland area growing up back then? Was that a good time to be growing up there? Or was it like a stressful time because people were always in the neighborhood? Was it safe?
Oh, it was like when after on the weekends.
Yes.
Go to a restaurant, get something to eat.
Was it safe in the restaurants to go to on the weekends, or was it a safe neighborhood?
The guiding principles that we've begun to imagine for the center are 3. One, I mentioned before, which is that everything we do should be fundamentally grounded in clinical psychiatry. Those are the questions we're trying to address. Second is a very sincere and deep goal to try to build bridges across departments in the universities, in this university, across disciplines, So we're talking about between psychiatry, neuroscience, neurology, the Department of Medicine. You can imagine for many of these cases, that we didn't have time to get into it, but, many of these major genetic risk factors, for example, for schizophrenia or for other forms of mental illness, have a lot of medical comorbidities. The autoimmune cases, you can already imagine, fundamentally, we're talking about, a disease mechanism that's based outside of the CNS. And then with regard to disciplines, in order to be able to do this work that we're envisioning is going to require people of an enormously broad range of expertise, from clinicians to clinical researchers to psychologists, neuropsychologists, to fundamental neuroscientists and people very interested in translational biology. And so we're very, very interested to work with and engage and partner with anyone who is interested in pursuing the goals that the center has and has an interest in any of this work. We would be very, very interested to speak with you and potentially to begin to work together. And last, a major issue is the prioritization of the care and the attention in terms of the research program. And that is a very clear priority, that we intend to prioritize those patients who need it most. And that's on at least two axes. One major one has to do with the healthcare and particularly mental health care inequality that all of us are so deeply aware of. And the second are particularly for those patients on the most severe and treatment refractory end of the spectrum, for whom very often an insufficient amount of attention and resources have been dedicated in that direction. Where is this center going to be physically located? What is sort of the physical structure of this? So I'm pleased to say that, and again, with really an enormous amount of leadership from Blair, the headquarters of the center will be here in this building on the 5th floor. In addition to that laboratory space that's on the 5th floor of this building, there will be a clinical research program that will have both inpatient and outpatient components. We're still discussing exactly how that would, be instantiated. But nevertheless, again, as I said before, that's going to require partnership with a number of clinics, with many clinicians, with many clinical researchers who are interested in partnering for the work that's being envisioned. In addition, there's going to be a satellite location at the Jerome L. Green Center downtown, where the Zuckerman Mind, Brain, and Behavior Institute, ZMBBI, is housed, and we'll be able to not only be able to partner with them, but physically be present in that building, establishing collaborations and building those bridges that I mentioned before. That is one of our many aspirations. A huge thanks for this goes to both Richard Axel as well as Daphne Shohami, who's now the scientific director there at ZMBBI, and we look very much forward to deepening our partnership with them. And last, before I stop, I want to say that since the conclusion of the agreement only a few weeks ago, there's already been an enormous outpouring of help and assistance and advice in order to try to get the center off the ground. And a few people in particular that I'd like to single out: Anne-Marie Sullivan, who is the OMH commissioner, and Tom Smith, who's the chief medical officer of OMH, have both been enormously supportive we're already having, fantastic conversations and agreements on the kind of work that really can begin immediately. Blair, of course, has been an incredible leader and champion for this whole effort. I want to give a particular mention to Renee Henn, who is the division director for myself and now Sander. Matt Ehrlich, who's a key person within the OMH system that has committed himself to really help with a lot of the logistics and the high-level thinking about how we can carry out a lot of the studies that I've outlined. Matthias Quick has been fantastic in terms of thinking about the space and where the center can be housed and how the renovations that might be necessary, and really prioritizing that in a way that's been enormously helpful. And Brian Chapman has been a tremendous advisor for us so far in terms of logistics and administrative coordination. So I'm going to stop there. But before I do, I want to just thank again the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. I mean, their investment here is obviously historic and very bold, and we very much intend to make every possible use of that investment. I'll stop here. Thank you.